Hello, everyone, and welcome to the fourth anniversary episode of The Secret Origins of Mint Condition. I am your host, James, and joining me, of course, is Joe.
Hey, James, thanks for starting this podcast. And wow, 4 years. This is pretty amazing. I mean, you know, not too many things last 4 years.
That's it.
Okay.
We outlast. We blasted more than some TV shows. Definitely more than a lot of comic book series
Yeah.
and other things.
Oh,
So
comic book series last 4 issues now. Yeah.
yeah, so we've lasted a long time. Of course, also joining me is Chris.
Whether people want us here or not, we're like Guy Gardner. We stick around, man. We got staying power.
Damn straight.
That's right. And joining us on this special episode is returning guest, friend of the show. I don't know what else I can say about the guy, but I'm so happy he's here joining us. Richie Garofalo is back with us as well.
Yeah, happy anniversary, guys. Yeah, woo! Happy anniversary.
So yeah, for 4 years, and we're close to 300 episodes. We're like, I think 20 away from 300 episodes or something like that when this releases. I don't know the exact number, but we're pretty close.
Probably in that neighborhood, yeah.
We're in that neighborhood. So yeah, so audience, if you've been a fan of this podcast for all these years, one, thank you for continuing to listen, to join us, and to come back each week for whatever we're going to share, whatever the topics are. As you know, with the anniversary episodes, we like to keep it to something that's a little bit more personal to the store, as much as we like talking about all the latest pop culture news or things that are going on, or even flash back in time and revisit some of the things we love. So for this anniversary episode, this topic has kind of been kicking around since year one, probably since the first 20 episodes of the podcast. There's still a list of episodes we still have not gotten to, this being one of them.
I think only 2 or 3 though, right? Like we don't have that many ideas left, do we? I haven't looked at the list lately, so I don't know.
Still a big one, though. I Love Lucy. We haven't gotten to that yet.
Yeah, but that wasn't on a year one list. This is like,
No.
we have like, I have like a whole page of like 20 topics we still have to get to. But from the year one list, like we eventually resolved that we don't even care is bowling a sport. You guys eventually hashed that out.
Chris
and
and
said,
Chris agreed
No,
with
you're
me.
right. I forgot that was supposed to be like its whole own episode, and then Joe like tricked me into respecting it as a sport or something. He used one of his Jedi mind tricks. I don't know how he did it, but it's not happening today. I'm telling you that right now. No Jedi mind tricks today. There will be no agreement.
I proved to him that there was actually defense in bowling, which people say there isn't, but there is. And that's what I think I won him over.
Okay. You got to tell me that one sometime.
Sure, it's very simple.
Defense and bowling?
Defense and
Okay.
bowling, not all offense.
yeah, so we had that episode, but I think we've come to it. And I think the topic for today so the topic for today goes back to the store days with Richie, where we started the comic book bull sessions.
Mm-hmm.
And there was one of those sessions where, and back in the day, Rich and Joe and Chris and I would discuss the merits of Batman v Superman. Obviously, back in the store days, Chris and I were big, diehard Batman fans, not real Superman fans. And then Chris took the reins and debated Joe against the merits of Batman v Superman in one of our epic comic book bull sessions.
For anybody who's not actually able to see this, which is all of you, the word debate is in air quotes because it was not really much of a debate. It was me banging my head into the wall while Joe calmly and coolly dismantled me. Pretty sure after everybody left that night, I continued banging my head into the wall. And Richie was kind enough to order pizza for everyone, which was extremely generous of him, as it wasn't a show so much as a slaughter.
So this happened, what, 25 years ago, maybe? It's something like that?
Yeah, at least.
My God.
No, he's about right. It's about 25 years.
Okay, yeah. So it's
It's
25-year-old. It's a long time, and like we've kind of, a lot of what we're talking about tonight, we've kind of covered in bits and pieces over the last 4 years of podcasting. We've talked about this, but a lot has changed. Like both Chris, all of us have grown and changed over the 4 years, and Batman v Superman became a movie at some point. Like we saw that evolution, and over the time period, I also, and I think Chris has agreed, we read a lot of more Superman, and we had a lot more opinions. We've also grown as people and had other life experiences. And I don't know if there's a debate anymore about Batman v Superman so much as it's more of, and this could be a bigger topic, just spanning off of this thing of like, the heroes that we loved kind of at the store time, I think we might have different opinions about them now.
Mhm.
And like where in the pantheon, like I'll just like, spoilers for I guess this own episode, like Batman, if I'm talking about my top 5 favorite superheroes, Batman jockeys for 5th position. He's not like my number 1. He barely makes the top 5. He jockeys it out with Daredevil. Him and Daredevil are like on the same pedestal, and depending on what mood I'm in, Daredevil kind of wins a lot of time over Batman for a lot of reasons that may or may not get to in this episode. So I thought it'd be a good topic for us just to discuss, like, why our thoughts evolved. Richie and Joe, I know Superman was always at the top of your pantheon, but maybe your thoughts about the Man of Steel have changed or just gotten stronger. And I don't know where Batman ever sat with you guys. I know Superman was always number 1, but I don't know where Batman was, if he was your number 2. Was he in your top 5? So I figured this would be a good discussion to have on this anniversary episode, and finally get to this topic we've had around since year 1 of the podcast. So
I'm really excited we're finally getting to this. I really am.
You
so
want to
that's
go first, Rich?
Yeah, Rich. So you can just jump off of what I said wherever you want to jump in with that. Like you could, however you want to handle it. There's no real rules of anything here.
Right. It's just us.
I mean, it was basically bare knuckle boxing 25 years ago. Why have rules now?
I can't reach into there. Well, for me, I've been like as you guys know, I really haven't picked up too many comic books outside of the occasional recommendation that I follow up on. So actually, after this latest Superman movie, Superman's gotten stronger and better for me. I enjoyed the movie. I still enjoy it. Superman has been like right up there with Popeye and Captain America, for me. I haven't seen the evolution completely. I'd say the last Superman comic that I read outside of like the World's Finest one that you guys recommended, which is, that's really like the Superman I grew up with. So that was wonderful read for me. Jump around. It's just Superman's still number 1. He's still strong in my regard versus Batman. Batman's gone through his evolutions as well. Sometimes I'm going to say cutthroat with the Justice League, knowing everybody's weakness and being, planning out, be able to stop all of them and whatnot. And you can sort of understand, but it's very cold-hearted. And but I like some of the other moments where we see the human in him. I don't know whether we can call him the Batwayne to Superman's Clark Kent. Superman and Clark are really one and the same, outside of, Clark pretending to not have powers, but they're both very the Boy Scout. I don't know whether that's the right term, but they're human. They're tender. They care. As we've said in the past, especially Joe, he's your friend. Batman was never anybody's friend. I don't even think back in the Golden Age he was exactly anybody's friend. I guess you could say he was Robin's friend, but I don't know. And then I prefer Nightwing over Batman. And I think it stems from that. I think that was the last time I had a podcast with Chris, that read. I mean, that's the kind of hero I like. Not that I dislike Batman. Batman's still up there. But compared to Superman, which is what this debate is, I would still take Superman over Batman. Next.
I'm curious. No, I'm curious. Just
sure.
as a few follow-ups to that before, like where if you does Batman make your top 5? I'm just curious. We never talked about this. I don't know with you ever on the podcast. So where does, like, if you were just to think about Batman in terms of your top 5 or top 10, where would you put him?
In DC, he'd probably be right around top 5. Yeah. But in the whole comic,
if you had like to pick all your favorite heroes across like comics or genres,
I would probably try to keep him in the top 10.
Okay.
Just out of nostalgia, just out of whatever. I mean, I still liked Batman. I've got to admit, though, I did stop collecting Batman before I stopped collecting Superman. So that'll tell you something.
Yeah, I mean, no, just curious. Like I said, it's no judgment. Obviously, I shared where Batman is in my pantheon of like if I was
Yeah.
gathering up all heroes. So it's and I'm curious. And Joe and Chris, you don't have to answer that question either, but
No, that's right.
just be curious. But and then the other thing I'll say before I hand it over to whoever wants to go next, I recently just listened to an interview with Mark Waid from like the past month, and Mark Waid in that interview spoke about the Tower of Babel, and he said it's one of his best stories, but he regrets writing that story. He said every time since he's written that story, everybody has leaned into that version of the unbeatable Batman, and he's like, I unleashed a Pandora's box that I wish I could have like taken back because some writers have taken that to the extreme and made the Joe's thing about the Bat God. So that's Mark Waid's point of view about Tower of Babel. I still don't think it's a great story, but obviously Mark Waid is the creator of that story.
I find that really interesting, and I actually disagree with him there. If anything, I think that interpretation of Batman was always not just possible, but coming. Like, I think that was always going to happen. I don't think anybody could have. That's not true. There are some writers who could have written it as well as Waid did, but I thought that was a really great story because when I was younger, I think I enjoyed sort of the badassery of it, like the ingenious aspect of it, and I loved the way that it ended, which was, he left the Watchtower before the rest of the vote was taken because he anticipated how everyone would vote, right? But as I reread it later on, I read it as a cautionary tale. So I actually really love that Waid wrote that story. I'm really glad he wrote Tower of Babel because I thought it was really well written, and I read it as a cautionary tale where that kind of harm, it doesn't get resolved for several storylines, and you get to see the way that hurt can reverberate. And even if his intentions were good, even Superman says, I know what you have, but you could have told everybody else and it wouldn't have compromised your plans in any way, shape, or form. And he's right. Like, Batman is completely in the wrong here, even with his justification. So I'm really glad Waid wrote that story because I enjoy it. I think that the stories that we get now, they were always going to happen. Maybe it would have taken longer. Maybe they wouldn't have had that basis, that foundation. But I think it's a great story. And for me, I think it's a cautionary tale. I love it.
I would agree with that, Chris. And basically, it's Batman. The ends justify the means, and I think it's a great story. But I agree with Waid that it's like putting the toothpaste back into the tube. You can't do it, and the genie's out of the bottle. All these other classic expressions. So yeah, when I was a boy, my two favorite heroes were Superman and Batman. The only comic books I bought for the first year had Superman and Batman on the cover until I discovered the other superheroes in the DC universe, and then it took a couple of years before I discovered the Fantastic Four and Spider-Man. If I had to say right now who are my favorite top five, one I'm leaving blank right now. Superman is number 2. Aquaman is number 3. I love Aquaman. Spider-Man, even though he's been written horribly the last few years, as has Batman, is number 4. And I would say number 5 would definitely be Batman. Yeah. Batman's in the top 5. He has to be. He's the second most iconic comic book character, after Superman. But I have soured on Batman over the years because the whole Bat-God thing, building the Hulkbuster armor to punch Darkseid, absolutely ridiculous. His superpower's been super rich. Lately, he's been super, not poor, but they took his money away from him. And basically, they've turned him into a psychotic, not even a vigilante. He's an anti-hero now, and that's not Batman. My Batman is the Batman of Denny O'Neil, Neil Adams, Irv Novick, people like that, who struck from the shadows quickly and then went back. He wasn't angry. He struck with finality. He accomplished what he wanted to do, but he wasn't like this current Batman that just seems to be, and that's very off-putting to me right now. Hopefully the new series that's starting next month will hopefully make him more of a palatable character, but
So the Babel is the story I was talking about that Batman, had the way as of.
he has everything to take all the Justice League down.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, that's
Contingency.
yeah.
And I agree with you. The story is good. I'm not saying that the story is bad. It's just that Batman, if we're talking personality, and I could sort of understand he wants that ability, or just in case You know, who knows that who's going to take over their body? Magic. Somebody melds into somebody else, and he's going to need these abilities to stop. So I can understand where the mindset, but the coming back with Superman saying, you could have told the rest of the team about, I guess, kryptonite or whatever the case is, so that, I mean, there was no reason to keep it a secret from them. Whatever. I think that just puts the layers into the personality and who he was and who he is. Of course, not reading the last 15 years and knowing all this psychotic nonsense and the rich and the poor and blah, blah, blah. I'm comparing my iconic Batman from, we'll say, 2000 to 1940.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, that's when I'm thinking about this conversation too. I'm just thinking about my own exposure to the characters as I know them as the time in which I like the character. So, like, that's kind of what I'm going on. Also, like, I've read some of the recent stuff too, so I do know the history. I guess like, well, I guess another bigger debate you could always have is like, what's your era of this character? Like, my era of Batman is always Batman the animated series. That's always the core character I go back to. I'm sure for you guys, you have runs of my Superman just because of how I was exposed to him. It's probably a combination of like Superman the movie by Christopher Reeves is probably the foundation of a lot of my Superman love, combined with a lot of like Superman for all seasons and you know and then more of late. Yeah, probably Superman from all seasons and Christopher Reeves Superman is probably my interpretation of the character. I mean, obviously there's so much more, but I just haven't read as much Superman as I have Batman. And I think the product of I don't know. I think when I was like the time before I started working at Mint is when like I was reading a lot of comic books when I started working at the store. I hadn't read a lot of comic books before. Like, pop culture spoilers, I don't know, Richie, you didn't even hire me. I hadn't read Dark Knight Returns. I hadn't read Watchmen. I hadn't read Kingdom Come. I hadn't read the Dark Phoenix saga. I like most of these, books. Like when I was working at Mint, I've read mostly none of them. So like my interpretation of Batman was like Adam West and then Michael Keaton's Batman. And that was like my knowledge of Batman. And I think, and Chris, I'm curious just to hear your thoughts because like, I think Batman at the time in which I was like, my late teens, early 20s, is just, he's sort of the character for that time period in the 90s. Like for a young man in the 90s, like don't want to get too philosophical, but I just think it was the time period and the way Batman was written. It's sort of like, you're trying to find yourself as a young man. Batman at that time was a character you could gravitate towards. I also think, I'm not the first person to say this, but like after like 9/11, I feel like a lot of our good guy characters became sort of anti-hero and grittier, even the good ones. And we grew up in that time, and Batman is like I guess the Boy Scout of anti-heroes at that time. I'm not saying Batman is an anti-hero. I'm just saying he represents sort of like in terms of like what you're looking for from your heroes at that time and the time period in which we were growing up. So a lot of I think that revolved around like a Batman. And as you get older as a person and just live more life, as great as Batman was, he's also antisocial. He's as we just talked about with Tower of Babel, like he's overcautious to a fault. Like there's a lot of things about Batman, like when you're like talking about your heroes, you don't think about in terms of like, what are the values of these characters and stuff like that. And so obviously, as I've gotten older, the representation of Superman and what he is and what he stands for. I really appreciate the character, and I've read a lot of stories, especially of late, as we get ready for James Gunn. Reading All Star Superman was a great book. Reading the Nail was a great book too. I know Superman's not quite in it until the end, but it really shows a world without Superman, what it's like. So there's a lot of stories now I appreciate a lot more about the character. Anyway, I'm kind of rambling on here, Chris. I don't know if I heard you nodding your head a little bit to what I was saying. I don't know if you disagree, but
No. I don't think that was rambling at all. Here's the thing: it's hard to have the conversation. I think sometimes. Why? Because they both characters have so much history behind them, right?
Yeah.
And when we're having the argument, when back in the day when we were having the debate of Batman versus Superman, I kind of partially misunderstood the assignment. And that's not like, oh, I didn't know what was going on. It was that my priorities, my thoughts were different. right, than Joe coming into this. Joe, you came into this. I'm only going to say this once. I know it's recorded, so it's for posterity. But Joe was walking in with a lot more. Sorry, had trouble saying it. Hold on, I choked on the word a little bit. He had more wisdom than I did. No, truthfully, like, here's the thing. I think, Joe, you walked into it with a lot more experience than I did. Richie, same deal. Like, both of you were like super kind to this kid that was all hardcore about Batman. And I think my arguments about them were always that, like, Batman could kick Superman's ass. He has to do it without powers. He doesn't get anything given to him, blah, blah, blah. So I was missing out on sort of like, I sort of had a different perspective that I was coming to that with, right? So, as a result, I was focused on what, like, different priorities than I am now, right? So that grittier, edgier made sense to me as somebody who was bullied a lot, and you have this character who inspires fear rather than respect. I really liked that. I liked the resourcefulness. I liked in my head that anybody could be Batman, forgetting the fact that, like, the dude is a billionaire, so not everybody could be Batman, right? So slightly different situation. And I think, looking back now, it's easy for me to see where the wisdom of age really does add a certain gravity to the conversation and the debate. And I'm with you, James. My Batman was Batman in the animated series. That was my Batman. Superman was the same Superman that you had, more or less. But I resented the whole Boy Scout thing, because as far as I had learned up to that point, playing by the rules didn't, that wasn't a strength thing. But I would learn later, Superman doesn't exactly play by the rules. He plays by ethics, and that's different than rules, right? So I don't know. I think I think there's so much history between these characters. You do have to go, okay, which character are we talking about? In which case, we're not debating the characters, we're debating the writers, right? We're debating the writers, not the characters. And that's why it's so hard to pit them against one another. But especially as I got older, I always go back to the same thing. And I love the quote, but I love that, in Hush, Batman says, I know that, deep down, Clark is essentially a good person, and deep down, I'm not. And that's why Batman will always beat Superman. It's not ability. It's not even intelligence or smarts. It's because Superman, as long as he's ever in control of his faculties, he will always hold back, because he does not believe in beating up on the weak. He does not believe in abuse of power, which is why it's so scary when you get to stories like Injustice and you see exactly how much he can abuse the power he has. I think it was Superman versus the Fatal Five, that, like, animated flick where, like, it looks like he's lost his mind on the Fatal Five, and he goes after this team of anti-heroes, and they are scared of him, and then he takes a breath, and the whole thing was an act. But he shows them just how terrifying he can be, and you really learn to respect that. But much like you were saying, Rich, and then I'm going to sort of pause and tap out for a second here, because obviously I can just keep going about this. I think for me, as much as I still, hold on, I had a thought. It's there, and then like a wisp in the wind.
That's me every day.
This is gonna drive me nuts, because there was something, Richie, you said earlier that I really wanted to seize on, but I think I might have started in the wrong place. So I'm gonna pause myself for now, because I've done quite a bit of talking.
Okay, I'll say that I wrote a little something here in that 6-page essay I wrote, but I'll just read one line. Vis-a-vis Bruce Wayne, he's a brilliant detective, combatant, scientist, engineer, tactician, businessman, but he still can't hold a conversation with anybody but a skill. He doesn't know how to talk to Dick and Barbara, even Alfred when he was alive. He was, near the end, he was just like, he's surly, he's mean, he's abrupt, and that's not the way Denny O'Neil wrote him. That's my Batman, by the way. Late 60s, Bronze Age. Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams, that's my Batman. Again, scary, creature of the night, right? They used to call him a creature of the night. But he wasn't vengeful, and he wasn't also broken like this Batman is. And I think this Batman is broken.
Right.
And I hope that the new writer who's picking up the new book starting next month will put the pieces back together.
Like, you can judge, like, this conversation based upon the Denny O'Neil Batman. I mean, not that you and Rich have a lot to defend. You were always like, Batman, Superman were like quote unquote super friends in your mind.
Oh,
It
there
was
was
Chris
best
and I.
friends back in the
It was,
Silver
it was
Age.
Chris and I who more had the problem that they were at odds with each other.
Yeah, we kept pushing the fight.
You
Well,
guys were in World's Finest, and we were in like Dark Knight Returns. Like
Right,
so,
exactly.
like you know.
When John Byrne redid when he restarted the character in '86, the first thing he did was tear that partnership asunder. He made them enemies, and then they became frenemies. But they never were like they were in the '50s and '60s. No, they and today it's kind of like Rich, you referenced that World's Finest book. That's when they were younger. They were, but there are years later after that the friendship starts to split because of their different methods. You know. But and as for Superman, I don't like the way he's been written mostly lately in the recent past either. I mean, when Brian Michael Bendis came to DC, he ripped the family apart. He sent the kid into space with the deranged dead grandfather Jor-El. Lois and Clark allowed that to happen. She went with them. She comes back without the kid. He's missing for six weeks and comes back 6 years older. And at no time did Clark leave planet Earth to go look for his son. Like, gather the Justice League. Hey, guys, I'm going to be gone. My kid's lost somewhere in the galaxy. I got to go find him. Worst parents of the year, Lois and Clark in that story. Like, worst parents of the year. You don't make your 10-year-old son who wants to go travel with his grandfather, who came back from the dead, you don't make him go. He's 10 years old. He has no right in this discussion. He has nothing to say about it. Mom and dad have the final say. You're not going. You're going to school. You're not going to outer space. Simple as that. So that bothered the hell out of me. Thankfully, Philip Kennedy Johnson and Joshua Williams, who's writing Superman now, they have kind of gone full circle. And Superman is wonderful to read again. I highly recommend it. I'm recommending it to Keith. Richie, if you want to pick up a current Superman comic, it's great. Mark Waid is writing him as Superboy, 15-year-old Superboy in Action Comics. Fantastic. So DC's got its, stuff together with Superman, but they still have some work to do with Batman. And I'll say one more thing, but then I'll shut up. My initial, and I think it's Richie's also, my initial introduction to the Man of Steel was, look up in the sky. It's a bird. It's a plane. Yeah. It's Superman. Stranger from the planet. It was George Reeves, right? Rich?
Yes.
George Reeves.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. That was
a friend to everybody. A nice guy, and just, you knew.
That first season, he had a little edge.
The first season, then Kellogg said, no more murders on screen, no more fisticuffs. They brought the people in from New York, Whitney Ellsworth, Weisinger, and they toned it down, and, it became a kid's show again. Yeah.
But
that's
what I was going to say. Is my era started with the Adventures of Superman with George Reeves, and then I have to say that when John Byrne took over the comic, as much as I liked Superman up to then, Superman had more of a personality, became more compassionate. There was
he wasn't as powerful either. He couldn't move planets anymore, and all that stuff from the '60s was gone, right? Yeah.
They toned his powers down a little bit, but I think he's probably gained almost all of that back. But it's just that he brought more life to the character, in my opinion. The comics,
and they finally made Lois Lane a real character instead of being the damsel in distress.
Yes.
She became the world's best investigative journalist. And that was the best thing that John Byrne probably did, was make Lois a three-dimensional character.
Yeah. So you take all that. I mean, from that point on, Superman was my guy. Not that he wasn't before, but he well, that got me back into comics. I mean, it was that kind of
the idea, Rich. That's when he did that.
It worked. Anyway, that's Batman. Yeah, Denny O'Neil. Actually, I loved Batman from looking at old books and stuff that I had. I had 1940s Batman and 50s. I really enjoyed the 40s, the 50s, and then the 60s when the Batman TV show came out. I was a little disenchanted with it in the beginning, as much as it was fun. I grew into it. I just thought it was just a little too campy, too goofy. Batman to me wasn't that kind of a guy, but and he never was that guy in the comics. You
No.
know, not even in the 50s, which the Batman was
Yeah, space
fighting.
aliens and mad
Yeah,
scientists and magic. Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
monsters.
So,
Yeah, all that stuff.
but
That
the
was my
Denny
first
only.
introduction to Batman was the TV series, and then the next day I
Yes.
went out and bought a Batman comic book. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I know that was your introduction to Batman.
yeah.
But I'm a few years older than you, so
I know. At
But
this
now
point in our
that, yeah,
lives,
that
which was
brings
a
the other
couple of
point.
years.
Chris is talking about your wisdom. Chris is probably your age now that you were when you were having this
Oh,
debate.
during the first big
Yeah,
debate.
yeah. Well, you were having
Yeah,
that first
depress us some,
debate.
some more,
Yep.
Rich. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think
Yep,
you were.
there
I
it
think
is.
you were.
You depressed, Rich? That's Chris.
Father Time is undefeated in this debate.
Yeah, no, Father Time.
Yep.
Yes, he wins every time.
Seems we're having the wrong debate. Father Time is the winner.
That's always. I think
Not
that's
Bruce Wayne, Father Time.
it's funny you mentioned Father Time because I think so for me for my money I identify more with Superman now if I'm looking at Batman and Superman and who I would like to be more with Superman in that debate, but overall Nightwing's my
Yeah.
guy.
Yeah.
He has
Okay,
been
yeah.
for a while now. It took me a minute to realize it. Actually, this podcast helped me realize it. But but Nightwing is that perfect blend of Batman and Superman, I think, because he does have to work for everything. I love that in that the Tom Taylor, right? The Tom Taylor series,
Yeah.
when he's mentoring Jonathan, Jonathan points out like you're used to being the little guy, and Dick's like, yeah, thanks, and he's like, no, I just mean you're used to having to avoid getting hurt. So you are more skilled than anybody I know. Like you cannot be lazy, right? And because he's more forgiving than Batman is, that goes doubly so. Batman doesn't trust anybody, but Nightwing trusts a lot of people. So he has to work that much harder to protect himself, right? He can afford mistakes even less than Bruce can because Bruce jumps to conclusions. Well, they both do, but Bruce jumps to conclusions. He assumes the worst, whereas Dick presumes the best and is prepared for the worst or tries to be, right? Um, so he's for my money, he's my guy. But I think for my money, Batman is still the more interesting character because of I mean they both have humanity, but I think because of Bruce's limits. To me, if I'm looking at who is the more interesting character, I go with Bruce. But for me, what has actually become most dynamic about the characters because Superman is proof. Joe, Richie, exactly what you guys were talking about with Superman, how he became more gritty and, well, quote unquote gritty, right? We use it to describe more realistic. But, Joe, I like that you mentioned, Superman became a kid's show. And I think sometimes that's a delineation with comic book characters that we draw too easily. Because, the stuff that we often say makes a superhero or the superhero property, whether it's a comic book or a TV show or a movie, childish is a more pleasant world or a character who is more pleasant or kinder or gentler, right? It's gritty and quote unquote more realistic. Meanwhile, you've got a guy in a bat costume who somehow doesn't get just boom headshotted by a sniper, and you've got an alien who can do whatever he wants. But sure, let's go for realistic because that's the important thing here, right? But we keep trying to make these characters, all of them, I think, quote unquote grittier in the wake of, like you said, James, in the wake of 9/11. And we argue that making it more quote unquote realistic, even though again it's not that, makes it better. And I don't think that's true. So I think we've really missed the mark in terms of how we prioritize the storytelling around these characters so that they become less inspiring and more cool to watch, which I think is a problem. I think one of the best developments that we've really seen for either of these characters, barring stories wherein they are, I don't like Superman, but I'm writing Superman, so I'm not going to have him go look for his son, which is ridiculous. I think the most dynamic, the most dynamic thing that happened to either of these characters was becoming parents. And I don't just mean Bruce in terms of Damian. I mean Bruce in terms of realizing that Dick is not his partner, Dick is his son, right?
Legally, adopted son, yes.
right, and them acknowledging that this isn't a buddy relationship like it once was. It's a father-son relationship. And hearing Bruce and Clark compare notes on being parents is really cool. And I think it after decades of these characters not really having a ton of opportunity to grow, because a lot of people who read the books didn't really necessarily want to see them grow, because that would mean change, and change is scary. I think that having them become parents, and me myself becoming a parent, which has changed, a lot of my viewpoints on a lot of things. I think it made those characters more dynamic to become parents and then watch them be. Clark always knew how to be proud of his child, but Bruce had to learn. And I like that, and I find that more interesting about Batman trying to figure out how to navigate that dynamic, because I think Bruce had to learn how to become a good parent, or become a parent at all, and Clark was always going to be a great dad. He was always going to be a great dad, and the only sin is that they didn't make him a father sooner.
I agree with that, Chris. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm with you. Nightwing is much higher in my list. Like, he's fully in my top 5, and I think the cooler thing about him is everything you described. But Batman is cooler being Nightwing's dad than having him just be Batman. It's like,
oh my gosh, I got to tell you, one of my favorite things. Gosh, and I can't remember exactly what book it's in. It might have been Beast World, when people were being turned into animals or something, or they were being attacked by animals. Was it Beast World? Was that what it was called?
Beast World.
Yeah.
Okay.
Beast World.
But basically, Batman telling this kid, "Don't worry, Nightwing's gonna catch you, and he'll keep you safe." And talking, and are you Nightwing's dad? And he goes, "Yeah, I am." And it's like, I love that moment and that pride.
I think earlier we liked Batman's badass qualities when we were back in the store days. Now I look for the moments when writers give him the human moments. That's what I enjoy in Batman, or when Batman's depicted is not his fighting skill, his amazing detective work, his gadgets. It's like when he shows that he's a person, because it's so few writers who know how to do it, and so few writers that put him in a situation where there's an opportunity to do it. And when it's shown, like, that's the most growth for the character, and it's the moments that I like the best out of the character. And I guess Batman in my mind is sort of like I said, he's best because he's Nightwing's dad. It also sort of puts him in my mind of, like, I know he's a main character, but if I'm looking at through the prism of Nightwing, he's sort of like a background character. Like, he's sort of, in my mind, more of the Alfred position when I look at my favorite characters. And like, Alfred's in every issue, but he's not the main character. And I prefer Batman when we see him like a little less, and we have Nightwing a little bit more.
I like the way people talk about him too. Like, sometimes when that's one of the things one of my favorite things about reading JLA was especially how Wally and Kyle talked about Batman. Other people
definitely afraid of him.
Batman. Sorry,
they were definitely afraid of him.
They were afraid of him, but they also they couldn't grasp him, right?
Yeah.
At some point in it's when the White Martians show up for the first time in JLA, and somebody they're talking about holding your breath, and Wonder Woman says, "Why would you need to know how long you can hold your breath?" And Bruce comes running up while dragging 3 unconscious White Martians behind him, says how long he can hold his breath, and then says, "You'd be surprised why." And nobody gets him except Clark. And that is one thing that I've always enjoyed about their dynamic, is that for as much as they don't understand about each other, they get it about one another. Like, they get what the other person is capable of doing. They just don't know how they're capable of doing it. And I think that's why they never quite manage to become friends, is because they get each other, but they can't understand each other, if that makes any sense, that distinction.
I mean, because Superman is like unconditional positive regard for everybody he encounters, and that's a concept that Batman, like, I don't even think can comprehend. Like, I mean, not to make him, like, I know a lot of especially the Donner movies made Superman like a Christ-like character, and in many ways his empathy and compassion is very much similar to a Christ-like character, and that's something Batman's mind would explode if he like was able to like tap into that. And again, and going to the point, like it just said, like, I know Batman has his own books. Hopefully, the new series will be good. But when Batman is at this level where he's the smartest guy in the room, he's the most prepared guy in the room, then having him not used as often or used in a team book is better because it's sort of like having the shark in Jaws. Like the less you see it, the better he is. And when he's more mysterious and he's not that like he's better because you don't have to worry about these other things that like when you start like rationalizing a comic book character, which I know is a silly thing. I understand his parents were murdered and it was like 40 years ago and it's a horrible thing. But you'd think with like, if you think about all the things Bruce has done for his training, he would have found a way to compartmentalize some of that to exist at the level he exists.
I actually think that's the most realistic part about him, though. I think that is the most realistic part about him because he decides that he can intellectualize it. He decides that he can compartmentalize it. He decides, I'm going to put this in a box and I'm not going to deal with it because that is not something that I want to do. That's not something I need to do, right? And so I think that to me, that's the most realistic part of him because he never heals, and so the wound festers. Whereas you see other characters, the journey they take, Dick's journey has a lot to do with healing, and a lot of that is courtesy of Bruce, who understands in a lot of ways that he hasn't healed, and he decides it's too late for him. I love the 2-part episode of Batman, the animated series called Robin's Reckoning.
Oh,
And one of the reasons, it's brilliant, and one of the reasons I love it is, sorry,
I think it won an Emmy Award.
I'm pretty sure you're right.
Yeah.
It's a great 2-part episode, but I love that he, Dick does not kill his parents' murderer, right? He doesn't kill him. And then he says, "You were right, I shouldn't have come along on this, Batman, because I'm compromised and you knew I would kill him." And Bruce goes, it wasn't that at all. I was never worried about that. Zuko has taken so much. I couldn't bear the thought that he might take you too.
Yeah.
And so like and so he understands at least part of Dick's healing process, right? And he helps facilitate some of that journey, but he won't do it for himself. And you start to see some of that parent relationship that he can't bear the thought of like losing his son, so he's overprotective about him. But I think that's something that a lot of people with trauma deal with in what I think is an unhealthy way, is to compartmentalize to such a degree that you decide it doesn't matter anymore, or that there's nothing you can do about it. So I don't think Bruce ever really heals. The wound just festers, and I think that's how you end up with a character that never really makes friends, that never trusts people, that is so damaged that he can't see the harm that he's doing, that the end justify the means. And I think that's, when I was younger, something I always liked about Batman was, you may not like his methods, but they're effective. And now as I've gotten older, I'm like, you know what? It's not worth the cost. No. Because as Clark says, we talked about this earlier, but as Clark says, I'm not telling you to not have the plans. I'm just saying you could have told them. And he's right. Clark is 100% in the right, because what would the Justice League members have done differently? Anybody who's mind controlled ever, who are they going to take down first? The first person they're going to take down is always going to be maybe Jean, but almost always going to be Batman, because he's always the biggest threat, always, every time, no arguments, right? So I don't know. That's something, it's a rare disagreement I'm going to have with you, James. I think that with all of his training, he didn't address the thing he needed to in order to heal. And I think that makes sense from a character standpoint, because if he had healed, I don't know that he gets to become Batman. But I think that's the most realistic part of him, is he knows all the ways to handle his trauma except to sit with it and heal it.
No, I'm not like dying. I'm just making a sort of an example of different things we could pick apart. But I don't disagree.
Oh,
I mean,
gotcha. Sorry, I missed that. So sorry, listeners. That whole rant was misinformed.
No. But it's a good point of the character, and just proving like why. Again, not that he's a bad character, but like as you get older, you kind of want to be. Superman's more of a person you'd want to be, and less of Batman. And because the point taken, and as we know in real life, trauma is a very individual thing. People handle it in many individual ways. Not everybody can get over it, and people do all the things that you said, Chris. And so Batman is a character or could be a character like that, depending on who's writing them too. I mean, this all goes back to the writers also. Sometimes how they depict Batman's persona and how he treats people and how human he is
Yes.
versus how inhuman he is. And some writers are either like he's deep in his trauma, and some writers, and I would argue sometimes in the animated series, he's a very well-adjusted Batman compared to some of the people that write him. And
He is, and I think they fixed that. In my opinion, I think they fixed that in Batman Beyond, because in not Batman Beyond, but in Justice League Unlimited, when they have that episode epilogue, and it happens in the future, and we learn that Terry is at least partially a clone of Bruce, right?
Where Amanda Waller has one of the best quotes in the history of animated series, which is, "It was simple enough. Bruce left his DNA all over town. Terry gives her a look, and Amanda goes, not remotely what I meant," which I think is a brilliant joke that I never would have understood as a child. I think it's great, but you know,
Waller says to Terry, she advises him. She's like, "Don't. If you want my advice." And she admits that like the world needs a Batman, and the Batman is great. But she says, "If you want my advice, kid, don't turn out like the old man. Such a great man, so alone." And that's where Bruce ends his life, right? As this old crotchety man that nobody, including Barbara, that nobody wants anything to do with, and the only person he's got left is McGinnis, his son, you know. And it's I love Batman Beyond because it's such a cool show, and there is a lightheartedness to it. But Bruce ends up ultimately, for everything he did, Bruce ends up alone, and it's his fault. It's on him.
I guess Kingdom Come gives him a more hopeful ending, but he's still kind of alone at Kingdom Come. He just has his friends at the end of Kingdom Come.
Right.
But
I think Kingdom Come gives him a much more hopeful ending, and I do think that there is, barring any books that came after Kingdom Come, right? Barring the other things. I think one of the best lines we get out of that is that he's traded his black garb for white. And that's the most hopeful thing we see, is that Bruce is more interested in now being a healer than an enforcer.
But there's really no timelines, I think, that any writer has written. And Joe and Richie have read more books than I have either of us have read. But I don't think anyone's ever written a history where Batman ends up happy. Like, I don't think there's ever been an ending where Batman's like surrounded by his loved ones and retired and enjoying his end years. Like, that's, whereas Superman, that obviously has been written many times.
Most recently in the last episode of Superman and Lois, right?
Yes. Yeah.
They finally ended it. They literally ended it, and it was bittersweet. But he doesn't die alone.
I mean, no writer, gets to get existential like Batman to be the core of the character. There's not like a happy ending for that character that's satisfying, I guess, or realistic, at least based upon the years of history they've written for this character at this point, where Superman has many opportunities to be happy at the end of his,
Isn't that so, I think, so interesting that for as many different takes as there are on both of those characters, and this was how, and I would debate it differently now, but this was how Joe beat me when we had the debate, is his primary point, and it's backed up by Injustice, which hadn't been written when we had this debate, right? But his point was, this is why Superman will always, win in the debate, Superman versus Batman, is he has Lois, and Batman does not have a Lois. No. And we learn through like Hush and other stories that Bruce is better with Selina around. Selina's good for him. Clark is the one who says it, right? But Clark is made better by Lois, and we learn through stories like Injustice that's, if you want to know the thing that can break him, that's the thing that can break him. But it's so fascinating that for as many different takes as people have on these characters, Bruce is always, no matter how much we say he's cooler or he's grittier or edgier, he's always alone. And as much as a lot of us, especially when we're younger, want to be the lone hero, none of us really want to be alone. We just think that we do. I think. I don't think we truly want to be alone. I think a lot of times we are pushed into a position where, okay, I feel alone, so I will embrace it the way that Bruce does. Um, and I want to be I want you to talk about me the way that you talk about Bruce. I want you to be scared, respect me. You may dislike me, but you can't help but respect me, right? But I don't, you know, he ends up alone no matter how many people write him, and I just find that fascinating.
Yeah.
In many ways, he's still an adolescent, because when you're an adolescent and you're young, you want to be left alone because your parents have too many rules on you. There's rules in school. There's rules in society. You can't do this. You can't do that.
Nobody
So
understands me.
nobody understands me. So yeah, Bruce. Yeah, the little boy that witnessed his parents murder, and it's been discussed. It's been past how old was he? Was he 8? Was he 10? Was he 12? Whatever. Let's say he was 10 years old when he witnesses his parents murder in Crime Alley. That's when he becomes the Batman, right? That's it, because he's lost his innocence. He's lost his adolescence. He's lost, but at the same time, I think he's trying to get that back. But obviously, he's not going about it the right way. He's probably the most complicated comic book character ever, but that doesn't mean he's the best. he's right up there. He's up there in the top 5. But and as we continue with this, I told Chris who my favorite new superhero. Well, I said I started with number 2, right, which is Superman. So I just I wrote a little something at the end of my little thing here, and I said, all this leads, what we just talked about, all this leads to the conclusion, leads me to conclude that something's been in the back of my mind since the end of the crisis, and simply that under the stewardship of certain writers, William S. Loebs, Mark Waid, Jeff Johns, Josh Williams, and Jerry Adams, I can now unequivocally state that Wally West, aka the Flash, is my favorite hero. He is, without a doubt. Wally is, and Wally is. He's centered. He's a bit of a nut job at times. At the same time, because he's a husband, he's a family man, he's a father, and Clark may not want to hear this, but Superman is not the center of the DC universe anymore. To me, Wally West is the center of the DC universe. He's the heart of the DC universe. So,
See, and that is where I think at some point we can have, well, maybe not a debate because you're changing it because of what you're saying. I agree that Wally is the heart of the DC universe, but I think Dick Grayson is the center of it. I think Dick has become the center of the DC universe. And I whereas, in Justice League, you always had the big 3. It was always Wonder Woman, Batman, and Superman, but Superman was always in the middle, and Batman was off to the side just a little bit. He was always, and I think that you swap those two, where Dick is now in the center and Wally is just off to the side. And I'd have to find the third for that little triumvirate, but I personally think that, and this is why I guess now we can't really have the debate, Joe, because for me, Dick Grayson is my number 1, and it's Batman is still in my top 5, but Dick is far and away my number 1, far and away from literally anybody else. But for me, there can't be a Nightwing versus Flash debate because unlike Batman and Superman,
they're best
Wally
friends.
and Dick are friends.
They're best friends, yeah.
They're best friends. They are best friends. And in all the healthiest possible ways. It's not just that they respect each other, but it's that they truly love each other, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I would agree 100% that Wally West is the heart of the DC universe, but I do think that Dick Grayson is the center of it all.
Okay, to be continued.
It's we've come a full circle. I mean, not just since the store, but now, we're into the second generation superheroes as the main focus. And I mean, listen, like I said, both of those heroes are always looming large, but I think it's interesting. Wally's a very interesting character. Dick, I think, is this I already shared. I think he's more interesting with Batman being his dad than he is being Batman's sidekick. That'd be a whole other episode going into the fact superheroes should have the sidekicks who became their own heroes should have gotten more of a spotlight and taken over the titles more often
or longer, or continue it. I mean, we talk about Kyle, Green Lantern,
Kyle,
Connor Hawk, for
Connor Hawk, yeah,
Green.
Connor Hawk, yeah.
You know, I mean,
Ollie's son, right?
this this stuff happened right before I took over the store.
Right.
Those transitions happened, and personally, I loved it, and I loved at that point. Lois got married to Superman, so there was potential growth there. I mean, I don't think I saw. I don't think they had a kid during my tenure. I think that happened.
No,
after.
the baby was
And,
born
Yeah,
during
later.
Convergence, which was
Conversion, yeah.
But
Yeah.
I liked those
Years later.
transitions. And then where did Connor Hawk go? You know, I mean, they brought back Green Arrow, and
That's a whole other ball of wax. These extended families they got a bit too big.
Listen, it's one of those things, and this would be a whole other. I don't want to derail our topic because we
Yeah.
were coming to a beautiful landing, and I
Yes,
don't
we
want
are.
to spoil it. But I just want to say, like, I feel as much as Jeff Johns and Mark Waid have done amazing things with the Flash and Green Lantern, and Kevin Smith did with Green Arrow. They also took, like, to Rich's point, we had the opportunity for growth because the second generation heroes took the front stage, but then Jeff and Mark like brought back the legacy heroes. Kevin Smith, like, you brought these heroes back into the spotlight, and so their counterparts who had taken the reins, which, Joe, to your point, like,
I'm sorry, really quickly, James. I do have to say, one of my favorite memories of mint condition that's like burned into my brain was absolutely the Green Arrow run. Because when Ollie comes back, Superman holds him up and says, "Great Caesar's ghost," and that tickled Joe and Richie so much. You guys delighted in that so much, and I could not appreciate it then. But it is burned into my memory how much you appreciated that he was saying that line for the first time in who knows how many years.
I don't want to put down those books because they're great.
Thanks
I
for
mean,
the memory.
yeah, I mean, the bringing back of Hal Jordan, the bringing back of Barry Allen, the bringing back of Oliver Queen, those are great books. However, they do stunt.
Yeah, they step on the toes of the legacy characters.
100%.
And to be fair, we've spoken about this before. It's not usually the writer or artist who makes this decision. It's editorial. And all that great stuff in the 90s with Connor and Kyle and Wally and Dick. Dan Didio comes along and says, no more legacy heroes. Get rid of them. I don't want them. We got to get back the iconic heroes. Well, can't we share them? No, they got to go. And that's why that really happened. You can't blame the writers. I blame the writers for a lot of stuff, and I did earlier in this video, how they've been writing Batman. But to be fair, a lot of things that we don't like when it happens to a character is really editorial.
Yeah, and it's amazing that they've...
Sure, that's valid.
I mean, it's amazing that we've gotten them back. I mean, it's amazing that Dick and Wally have survived it, and Kyle is around, but Kyle is not... Like, I mean, Jeremy is like doing a great job, but Kyle is definitely not the Green Lantern of old.
Well, right now, Kyle and Connor Kent, they're traveling the universe in that spaceship that was in the Green Lantern animated series that Jeremy Adams wrote.
Oh, okay.
And they're having some really cool adventures. So yeah, they make a good team, Kyle and Connor. I like what they're doing with them.
Oh. Like I said, it's just a miracle that those two characters survived the booting of the legacy characters back to back to sidekicks, or made them disappear sometimes altogether for a period of time. And not to say like and none of the other legacy characters, I guess, as after Didio, like, it's not like we have an Aquaman legacy character. It's not like we had really a Wonder Woman legacy. Like they got squashed, unfortunately. So
yeah, Donna Troy's been stepped on a lot. It's really they've done her dirty many times.
Well, I think I think it was just one of those things where, and this is where again you have certain characters that manage to step out of their predecessor shadows, and others that don't. In so many ways, Donna Troy was a carbon copy of Diana, and it seemed like it was hard for writers to find anything interesting about her, and I think that was too bad. But I also think that one of the best ways to uncover what could be different about a character than their predecessor is exploring what they do in a team dynamic. And I think that's where certain characters really shine. So to this day, I'd still rather read a Batman book than a Superman book. But I think Superman is really interesting. I think both characters are really interesting when they're in a JLA situation. Because I think some characters do better when you put other characters around them. It's one of the reasons I'm excited about. I still haven't seen the James Gunn Superman, but I'm actually excited about it. It's one of the things I loved about Young Justice as an ongoing animated series. It's one of the things I loved about them was uncovering the different dynamics that made these characters different than their predecessors, so it felt organic instead of manufactured.
And I agree. And even though I missed him on the team when they did the New 52, and I wasn't the biggest fan of Cyborg, but I'm glad Cyborg got the tap on the shoulder to be brought into the main fold, because even though he wasn't a legacy character, he was in the legacy character sort of plane of characters. Like, he's fine, and everyone loved Teen Titans because obviously Perez's writing and artwork, unbelievable. But
George Perez, yeah.
But then after George Perez leaves, the character, I felt kind of, like, at least when I came to reading them, the Teen Titans weren't what the Teen Titans were back in the day when Perez was doing it. And it was nice to see Cyborg brought up from, like I said, the B team, and brought to the prominence. So, but that's a whole other thing. We've already started on, like, legacy characters and why they're important before.
Okay, for hour 2, everybody.
Yeah. Our 4th anniversary episode turned to a 4-hour episode, and 1 hour for each decade.
Brilliant. For each year, we'll get to a point where it's when we get to 4 decades, we will have earned an hour for each decade.
That's it. There you go. Thank you for correcting me. Yeah. But any final, I guess, thoughts or commentaries or things like that before we bring this episode in for a landing?
Like I said, when I was a boy, my 2 favorites were Superman and Batman. And I know I've said some negative things. Negatory. Who said negatory? Some wrestler.
I was going to say, wasn't it Daffy Duck or Daffy Duck as Buck Rogers? Duck Rogers, I think.
Duck Rogers.
In the 24th and a half century. I said some, negative things about Superman and Batman vis-a-vis the way they're written by current writers that just, because we all have our favorite iterations, as we pointed out. But I still love both characters. They're both in my top 5, but Wally's number 1 now. And I think Wally's been number 1 for a long, long time, and I just didn't want to accept it. So here we go. We have a pop culture confession here, guys. I think Wally's been my number 1 favorite superhero, at least since Mark Waid took over, and that's back in the mid-90s or 92, 93, something like that, right?
At least.
I thought it was a little bit later than that, but yeah.
Yeah, but Keith, he'll please, in the notes. Yeah, get it straight for me. But yeah, I just can't get enough of Wally West. And his current book wasn't too good, but that writer is gone. And now Mark Waid, along with another writer, is writing Wally again. I don't know how much longer, but I haven't gotten the first issue yet, but I am salivating to get that issue. Mark Waid back on Wally West. Can't wait. So yeah. I'll leave it at that.
Richie, any final thoughts?
Just thanks for inviting me. I love listening to you guys.
You're welcome, Rich.
I haven't changed my mind. I think Superman is still. I think I like the human part, and Chris had brought and Joe. I mean, it's when the superhero shows that human moment, the compassionate moment, or whether the human side. That to me is the more interesting part of the character. Yeah. It's not the powers, it's not the busting this or busting that. It's when they show that human side of them. And I'll throw back to an issue of Hitman, where Superman sits on a roof with Hitman, and they have this conversation.
I remember that issue. Yes,
that's one of my favorite issues. And it's not because it's Superman, whatever, but it is Superman. Okay, Superman is this big iconic guy, and what is Hitman? I mean, he's the personality. You guys can help me there, but I mean, they're 2 totally different people, yet they're sitting on the roof having a conversation with each other, and it's the human side of these characters that I really like. That's it.
No, it's great. And I actually went and tracked down that issue. Tracked down that issue because it's available on Hoopla and the Hitman collection. Because you had mentioned that early on in the podcast, and I'd not read it, and so it's available. If you go on Hoopla and you look at the Hitman Volume 1 collection. Is
that Garth Ennis, James? Is it Garth Ennis the writer on that book? I don't remember.
I think it might be Garth Ennis.
I think it was.
It sounds like a Garth Ennis type story.
Yeah. So, and Chris, you got any final?
I'm really glad you were here, Richie. I mean, because I think you distilled it perfectly, those human moments. and sometimes those unexpected moments. One of my favorite Batman moments is still, it's actually Batman's not present at all. It's Batman the Animated Series when we find out that it's called Old Wounds, and we find out through a retelling of a story from Dick to Tim Drake about why he stopped being Robin. And then it turns out that Bruce had hired this guy that he had brutalized, and Robin says, "Huh? Turns out Batman does." What was it? Oh gosh, the exact line was, "I guess Batman does have a heart." Who? Oh, no, yeah. Oh man, this is gonna bug the hell out of me now because I had it in my head. But basically, turns out Batman does have a heart. Who knew he had one? Kind of thing. Or no,
Yeah.
that's what it is. I guess Batman had a change of heart. Who'd have thought he had one? And I like that human moment that it turns out that behind the scenes, without telling anybody about it, Bruce had hired this guy that he had brutalized. That Dick had told him, "No, I'm not going to be a part of this. I'm not going to beat this guy up with you in front of his son." And he leaves, and then it turns out that Bruce heard that. He didn't say anything. He never apologized to Dick, but he realizes he's wrong. He makes that change. And then for me, Richie, you mentioned the Superman issue. For me, it was this wonderful issue of Superman that looked like it was just kind of a standalone thing, but it was the entire issue was 4 panels. It's done in primarily 4 colors. This would have been 2000 or 2001, I believe, and it's Superman fighting these 4 different villains, and there's no question how this is going to end, which is why it feels like a toss away issue, right? But at the very end, he gives each of these 4 villains, after he beats them, he offers them all the same sort of speech about the choices that we make, and they don't need to define who we think we are. It doesn't have to define us. We can change, we can grow, we can be better. And 3 of those villains walk away from him, but it's Major Disaster who falls to his knees and is repentant. And Superman puts his hand on his shoulder as Major Disaster cries about the crimes that he's committed. And it's at that point, a couple of issues of JLA later, when we have the Age of Obsidian, or the Obsidian Age, and Major Disaster joins the Justice League. And it's because Superman paved the way for him to be a better person. Now, what happens to him after that, I never really followed, but that issue always stuck with me because Superman keeps trying, and he has that connection with someone that he sort of has no right to connect with. It's not like he has this connection with some big time villain. He could have just put, this guy, Major Disaster, in his place. This C, maybe B-list villain, put him in his place and left it at that, and he doesn't. So I'm with you, Richie. Those human moments, I think you distilled it perfectly.
Yeah, I would say I agree with everything. I mean, and I'm always for the humor. Well, I guess my humor, and I've said this line many times, but I always go back to that Batman the Animated Series moment with the Bane episode where he's like, he trashed my car outfit between 2 guys. That's pretty personal.
Brilliant. Fantastic writing and delivery.
And delivery, and it Batman's got a sense of humor in that show because he's made other quips, but that's the funniest one, and it's so dryly said, but it's a funny line. And then not to belabor things that make us because Chris and I've talked about this. Well, Chris has brought him up, but obviously the Justice League Unlimited episode where Batman stays with that member of the Royal Flush Gang is the most human.
Still
moment.
Breaks my heart.
My favorite line from Superman the movie. It's early in the film. It's the interview scene on Lois Lane's rooftop penthouse on that Saturday night.
Penthouse balcony that she cannot afford a reporter's salary. But anyway,
she gave me some wine. No thanks. I never drink when I fly. And Christopher Reeve delivers it not deadpan like Adam West would have. You believe it. It's just perfect. It's just beautiful, and it's so Superman and so Lois, and you realize right then and there that these 2 people are going to fall hopelessly in love. And, it's Superman and Lois, one of the greatest love stories in fiction. It really is. I think it is, And that's why I enjoyed Superman and Lois, the TV series, for 4 years so much, because it was a great love story. But, yeah, these characters have many, many attributes. But for me, Rich, again, you hit it on the nose with the humanity of these characters. And to me, the most important thing with Superman is his connection to Lois. She grounds him. She makes him human. Along with Mom and Pa Kent, of course, but she's the final piece of the puzzle. to make him Earth's greatest protector. It's
Yeah.
all about the humanity, Rich. You're right.
Absolutely. And as Joe, as you always say, best line, Superman, he's a friend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who are you? A friend. And then she faints.
Well, listening audience, I hope you've enjoyed this 4th anniversary episode where we finally got to a topic that was clearly near and dear to our hearts from back on the store. I obviously could not have done it without my excellent panel. So thank you very much, Joe.
And thank you, James, once again for starting this amazing podcast 4 years ago. So we really appreciate it. We love you for doing it.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Chris.
Love you guys. Here's to another 4 years and 4 more after that.
Thank you. And thank you, Richie.
Thank you, and happy anniversary once again. This was wonderful. I look forward to the next time.
Absolutely. Yes. I love all you guys. And thank you, anyone listening to this who has contributed, been a guest on the show for the last 4 years or just in the past year. It's always a pleasure to connect with the friends from the store, to get to see you, to have you chat on things that we used to chat back in the day. So I appreciate everyone who's listening, who's contributed. I just also appreciate if you're just listening to the podcast and you had nothing to do with the store, or you're just tangentially connected to the store and you're listening to this podcast. I appreciate you doing that. The only thing I'll ask, if you have, I rarely ask for this anymore, but if an anniversary gift would be just leaving a review on however you're listening to this. You're usually away. That's always appreciated. We thank you for listening. We're off to kick off Year 5, Season 5, however we want to do it. We'll talk to you on the next one.